Yeah, I know.
What we're trying to do here. You just step back for everybody for a second and say, like, just the high points of what you're trying to explain and then what you're actually asking of all the people in the room.
I'm trying to give you the background info so I can get to where we need input from you guys. So let me run through the background here, trying not to cover it in too much detail. This is not the plan. This is just the synopsis for the region now. And what we want to find out is, in terms of strategies, are we matching planning objectives? And are there information that you find is more relevant than others? Okay, so let me continue. I know people are interested in diversified ag on HNS lands. That is the next sector here. The plantation issued a diversified ag conceptual plan in March of this year. And on page, without going into specific irrigation demands for the various crops, if you look on page 20, the table there, it's called Scenarios, Future of HNS and Important Ag Lands, shows scenario 1 as HNS conceptual plan. That's the one that's more based on specific locations of crops. The other scenarios are developed with input from the ag community, where there was a lot of opinions that maybe the plantation, any future ag use would be concentrated on the important ag lands that were designated. They make up about 27,200 acres.
But you have at the bottom of that column 34,900.
34,900 makes up the entire plantation. And then you have the field, the row that's called fallow or non-irrigated cover crops. So in terms of scenario 2, where you're only farming IAL, then that portion is basically no irrigation, no demand, no crops. As a comparison then, the plantation as a baseline comparison, sugarcane water use rate of 5,500 gallons per day per acre would equal about 194 million gallons a day. And as you know, that need changes seasonally and year by year. But in all cases, what HNS has proposed now is a significant reduction. This would include not just based on the conceptual plan that addresses the EMI system, but would include crops that would be serviced by the Wailuku Water Company. So 107 million gallons a day is what HNS believes is economically viable. Then there's been other proposed crop scenarios. There's been several initiatives on the island, so we try to extract information both from publications and then sort of vetting that with the ag community. So the scenario 2 there, for example, has a heavier emphasis on diversified crops with about 8,000 acres, which is typically a high irrigation demand. So that total demand, even on a smaller acreage, would actually, the high range would be 124 million gallons a day. So again, I mean, these are all plausible scenarios, but we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know the phasing of how economically viable these crops are, where it would occur first. So we're really just looking at this huge range of options. Yes?
I have a question. Total plantation, you show under diversified ag plan with 100% of plantation acreage being used, that the irrigation demand would be 107.79 million gallons a day. And then in scenario 2, with just the IAL lands farmed, which aren't total plantation, because they aren't 34,900 acres, your high end comes to 124.45. Now, if that's less acreage, why would you allow for more irrigation demand than you would for the total plantation?
Well, that would reflect what we get from the different the Shaka movement, the different plans that have proposed more diversified crops, so larger acreage for diversified crops that is depending on cultivation methods and a lot of different factors. But so if you're looking at the first acreage for diversified crops, that scenario is 8,000. In the HNS scenario, they have some proposed grass-fed beef, for example, in areas that are wetter, that do not require irrigation. So even though the total acreage active cultivation would be smaller spatially, it would be more water intensive in that scenario. Then assuming that 100% of IA lands will be cultivated.
Did you use the demand low or demand high figure?
I'm sorry?
Did you use the demand low or demand high figure to get that?
It has a range for each one.
But their current plan says that they're not gonna irrigate 4,000 something acres, and that about 26,600 are what are gonna be irrigated. I mean, this is what they're presenting to the Water Commission.
Yeah, so this includes the conceptual plan, but that only covers the EMI service land. So we're adding whatever is serviced. They had similar statements for the Wailuku Water Company's service properties.
But that's only a couple thousand more acres.
Yeah,
It doesn't
so
add
that's
up to
biofuel pretty much.
44,000.
So this combines the two. That adds up to 107 in demand. So this does not account for what HNS claims in inefficiencies and water losses. We're dealing with that separately down the
Okay, so
line
you
here.
don't put in the 27,
Right, that's
the
later.
22% for system losses.
Is there any
Okay.
consistency on this chart? You have under grazing, certain amounts of water needed per acre, but on the page, 2 pages before, on page 18, where you have pasture, you have 0 demand. So in other words, it seems like either grazing doesn't need water or it doesn't need water.
Yeah, it's very regional, depending where it is. So this is the Department of Ag's assumption, typically for grazing. Typically, you don't have an irrigation demand. HNS is proposing some acreage that it will be irrigated and others that won't. So it really represents the range. And again,
What's the total, you've got on page 18, it starts out saying the HCNS plantation consists of over 43,000 acres. Underneath this table, it says total 36,000 acre plantation.
yeah, so the HNS plantation consists of 43,000 acres of land and 35,000 acres that's been in cultivation. So there's some land that's never been cultivated. So the 35,000 is that.
Is that land owned by AMB or is that land that they're?
Yes.
Okay, so there's some percentage of land that they're farming that's not owned by
That
AMB,
they don't
that's
own,
being, they're
yeah.
leasing from the state.
At least several
from
thousand.
Oh, in terms of
acres.
ownership. Well, 35,000 acres may include some that is leased and not owned. I couldn't swear on it,
Because
but
they're
it
giving
does.
that
it's
back, so
reflected
what
on
we
it.
need to see is what exactly what is it that they're farming
yeah,
after
we're
they give
looking
all that
at the
acreage back.
cultivated portion, sort of regardless of
Well,
ownership.
I'd like to see a number of how many acres they're actually getting back out of that. If it's a total of 43,000 that they're calling their plantation, some of that's going back to the state and to DHHL
Mhm.
from the leases that they're giving up. I've
So-
never seen that number.
Yeah, okay.
So there's gotta be a hard number of somewhere.
Of what owned then versus leased. Yeah, so the different scenarios represent the 35,000 acres anyway that's been in cultivation regardless of ownership. That's been a sugarcane
Right,
cultivation.
they're not gonna farm what they don't own anymore, they're giving that back. As they finish up the sugar cane, they're not replanting, they're giving that back.
But someone may
Well,
farm
the
it.
conceptual plan calls for full use of the 35,000 acres.
But I know for a fact that they're giving land back to the state after
Okay,
they finish.
yeah, maybe it's inaccuracies in the plan. So we're just basing it what they have said in the March 16 plan.
Is that March 16, March 2016, is that, we've seen the map, but we've seen no text for that. You have an
It's
actual-
available on the commission's website.
Is that commission?
I mean, we can get it for you, sort of like a convoluted way of getting it, but,
Thank you.
yeah.
Does the demand farming figure for all those crops assume that it's a drought?
It's a range with a lot of assumptions of not knowing what the proposed cultivation method is, the exact region, the exact soils. So I would take this range with a huge grain of salt. This is something we're trying to use, kind of present some scenarios, not having an agricultural water use development plan or hard data. I mean, this is sort of the optimistic view of the plantation and some alternatives that have been brought out in the community. So this is kind of as good as we can get it for now.
I would suggest in the text of what A&B is sending out with their exhibits, I think the figure is 32,000 something, 200 acres total, and then of those 27,000 are important ag and so forth. They are not using 35,000 in the text of what they're describing that their use is going to be. So, you know, just to be accurate, I think you should look at the exhibit you're getting for the, you know, for the.
Well, we are, and what I'm saying, I mean, that is
Yeah.
what it adds up as, in fact, when you add the information that they provided for the Wailuku 3,000 acres or whatnot, and what was provided for EMI.
No,
So-
it's total 32,000, I believe.
Well,
No,
double check.
including both, I think. Well, maybe wrong, but.
Well,
I-
we
I
want to
don't- I
know
don't
if we
think
have
they-
incorrect
I don't
info
think
some.
that they actually have 35,000 acres that they own, so that.
They may not own it,
shouldn't
so
be
that is
listed.
still based on previous sugarcane cultivation, regardless of ownership or lease. We got that noted though, so there was a question about the acreage and checking with the EMI. No, but, okay, let me move on. I don't want to drag this on too long. Resource adequacy, so we're talking now about available resources, projected demand, where we're at. So just summarizing, water demand based on population growth for Central Wailuku aquifer sectors would require an additional 14 million gallons a day by 2035, within a low to high range of 10 to 17. Then now we're talking about the system losses, what type of source you have, high growth years and other factors. You would add about 3 to 4 million gallons a day to provide for those uncertainties. This does not now include agriculture irrigation yet. Surface water availability, very uncertain pending the outcomes of Maui and the East Maui contested cases. We know upstream uses for municipal public trust uses has been recognized in the 2014 settlement by the Commission for Nawa'eha as 3.2 MGD, so that may be some guidance. For East Maui streams, which provides municipal supply upcountry, that demand ranges 10 to 17 million gallons a day, with that higher need would represent if you provide service to the entire upcountry meter list, which we're going to talk about in detail tomorrow. So again, we don't have a means of determining the outcome, obviously, of these two ongoing cases, but I think community input to this process has been really important because it does guide the Commission in what upstream uses do the community deem acceptable and what is not. So we're including it with a lot of uncertainty. Then again, looking at sustainable yield, reported pumpage, there are available yield, but if we're assuming there's a theoretical reduction in yield based on the long-term drought, up to 29%. If you look at the chart on page 21, you have the upper graph showing you sustainable yield, and the gray one, I guess, is the drought scenario. So if you look at projected base case demand, could theoretically be met with groundwater sources within the region, not meaning that that is the recommended strategy. We're looking at a combination of different conventional and alternative resources, but it gives you some idea of where high growth, low growth in the region compared to available groundwater would look like.
Makes no sense to me. You've got several different things going on here. The straight lines going across, and then you got the growth line. What is the relationship between them? And what is when you say drought scenario, where is that described?
We talked about that a little earlier. If you theoretically, if you have a drought recharge situation, we know that it's been assessed by USGS to reduce recharge by up to 29%. So again, it's just a hypothetical scenario. If you want to look at long-term drought scenarios, what would, this is based mainly on community input to not take sustainable yield at face value if you want, but just consider what long-term drought would look like. So in this scenario, I think this pretty much gives some useful information to the Commission, who's looking at demand by hydrologic unit, not by community plan or municipal system, with some assumptions that...
You have two hydrological units, and a straight line, do those combine the two units?
Yeah, you have both here. You have central separately, and you have Wailuku on the bottom separately, and then you have the both combined. So it just tells you a relation between available groundwater in the region and projected population growth. It does not give you the whole picture by any means. So, of course, to address planning objectives and the various constraints of using groundwater and other resources, a combination then of ground surface water and alternative resource use are considered. We're going to briefly talk about those a little further down. Let's just mention first the land use based demand scenario. Again, that's highly unlikely on a 20-year time frame, but we want to look specifically at DHHL proposed projects and entitlements, land use based, because those are instructive in terms of resource use, location, and the type of resource. DHHL has their own zoning designation, so we look at that separately from the county zoning designations. Then just briefly about drought and climate change scenarios. Even though we're looking at a 20-year time frame, we know we have some of the service areas that are drought prone, both from water supply, vulnerable because they're dependent on surface water. That's mostly the Kula area. So when we're looking at available surface water for drought areas that are reliant on stream flow, the stream flow that's available 95% of the time, it's considered as a severe drought scenario. Turn to page 22. Climate predictions. We have some preliminary predictions on future climates for Maui Island specifically. That includes wet areas actually getting wetter and dry regions mixed with some wetter, some drier. General mean annual rainfall increases. So again, by 2035, these changes cannot be reliably predicted, but we can still address them through diversifying conventional resource use and augmenting or improving the resources that we have. We talked about water loss and uncertainties. Depending on what resource is used, you have leaks, you have seepage, evaporation, and there's other inefficiencies that you cannot eliminate, but you can reduce those through system storage efficiencies. You mentioned the large reservoirs that are unlined and uncovered, for example. So depending on what the resource is, we don't factor that into demand, but on the supply side, there's sort of like a 10 to 20% inefficiency factor. Okay, optional strategies then. I'm not going to cover these in detail, but for this region, almost all of them apply. Rainwater catchment, which can just be rainwater from a roof or another surface. It has limited uses because obviously it's a non-potable quality. In Wailuku region, some of that occur. Reclaimed wastewater or recycled water, as it should be called, is really valuable, specifically for irrigation. On page 23, you have a summary of what's available and used in the region. The Wailuku Kahului wastewater treatment facility currently treats to R2 level, which is not allowed by Department of Health to be used as extensively as the next step, which is R1. That's what's being produced at the Kihei wastewater treatment facility. Currently, there's about 4.7 million gallons a day produced in Kahului and 3.6 in Kihei. And according to Wastewater Reclamation Division, there's about 0.7 million gallons a day R1 treated water available to use at peak demand period, meaning that they could reliably provide that without detriment to their existing committed customers. They're also indicating that the R2 production at Kahului plant will be upgraded. And this is important because if this project in fact expands both to better water quality and as is proposed now, using an existing Maui Land and Pine transmission system that will bring R1 water closer to the HCNS owned land in Kahului, so that could be a viable source depending on what crop.
You know what they're using it on right now, the R2?
Very little, it's almost nothing.
What are they using it on?
Well, the restrictions are, do you remember? I can't recall
You can't use it on any kind of crop
Nothing.
that you eat directly.
Yeah, no spray.
It's just that small amount that they were putting on that experimental sugar that they had at the
We
Well-
were gonna use some at the airport for irrigation, but I don't think they can.
Yeah,
because they
yeah,
have to upgrade it.
it's very little, it has to be underground, et cetera.
Zero
So this would assume that it's upgraded to R1, so you have it more diverse. And I mean, of course, there's issues, there's nitrate in there, so there's always arguments how usable it is, but again, it's an option, it's an alternative to be used.
So supposedly that Energia project with the, growing some fuel crops on 500 acres is supposed to use water. I don't know if it's R1 or R2.
I don't know either if it could be R2.
It's coming up at the console this week.
Not sure, don't know that.
Okay, well,
Okay, the map on 24 shows you the current distribution system for the existing R1 and some of the potential expansions, none of these that are on the books or in CIP. Some of those included expanding it northward towards the Monsanto, North Kihei fields. Stormwater reuse, we heard from the community that this is something that should be looked into and promoted further, capturing and reuse surface water runoff.
I have a question about the wastewater reuse.
Yeah.
There's no discussion about extending the wastewater to Wailea, the golf courses?
When we get
There is
into
in
the resource
strategies.
strategies here, we're going to talk about that.
It's on the
Yeah.
map.
Thank you.
yeah.
Stormwater reuse, again, it can be simple, small rain barrels, but it could also be something required in a new design of new development, detention basins. There's a couple of different technologies that are outlined on top of page 25. Desal, there's been some studies and some cost estimates. We haven't heard that that's a very viable or desirable option from the community, but it's looked at. It can be desalinated seawater or brackish water. Costs are comparatively high to conventional resources, but and you also have some issues with brine disposal. Conservation is a big one. We did have, it's in the back of this material, we did have both online surveys and paper surveys and really trying to gauge what is aggressive enough or too aggressive, both for the municipal, the county conservation program and for private water purveyors. There could be countywide requirements for new design of development projects, what type of landscaping is appropriate in dry regions and so on. So we'll talk about that in the resource strategies. On page 26 on the top gives you summary of some of the county Department of Water Supply conservation program components that includes audits to commercial resort type customers and some direct install when you go in and retrofit low flow fixtures, that kind of thing. Rebate and incentive programs, we're looking at the toilet rebate program right now to be launched next year. Expanding conservation requirements to landscaping, both educational or it can be mandatory. Awards program for customers, energy production efficiency. Most of that is the demand side in terms of changing customer behavior and use. There's also lots of measures on the supply side, such as leak detection and other efficiency. I won't go into that into detail. Okay, bottom of page 27, last thing, resource augmentation. We've heard from the community that this plan should not focus just on developing resources, what resources to use for what purposes to accommodate growth, but also strongly include how to enhance and augment the resources we have. That includes watershed protection, whether that's passive protection through fencing critical watersheds and protecting them, or actively reforesting watersheds. Another component of that is wellhead protection. I guess we have tried a couple of times to bring it to county council. That's the program to protect potable drinking water by restricting high-risk uses around potable wells. The two maps on page 28, the left one shows active watershed protection in the region. County Water Department funds about $2 million a year of watershed protection efforts by various partnerships. Here it is the West Maui Watershed Partnership, the East Maui Watershed Partnership on Haleakala, and the Leeward Haleakala Restoration Partnership. The map on the right It's kind of small, but you can see those blue and red lines that would represent the areas when we're talking about protecting potable wells and restricting land uses. Those would be the wellhead protection areas that we're proposing. Okay, at the end. Recommendations. This again is a summary for this region. Obviously it ties into other aquifer areas and other systems. So it's a work in progress, and we're sort of gauging here now, generally, have we met the planning objectives with some general strategies, and we'll take a short break after, and we'd like to look at them really in detail and get your feedback on that. So based on planning objectives and input, combinational strategies are recommended, starting on the next page, that some of them are addressing conventional resources regionally, and others are island-wide, such as conservation, watershed protection obviously applies to multiple resources. One of the main objectives, as we said, the key issue for this area, if we got it right, is alternative ways to meet the future water needs of all water users and users in the region, given increased growth, especially in South Maui, and reduced water transport from East Maui streams and Nawa'eha. So the summary there, then, we'd like to get your input on how can we achieve that, what are acceptable strategies, what's missing, what's incorrect. So before we continue that, I know this was a lot to digest. We can go back and refer to material. A 5-minute break, some drinks and a restroom break before I continue. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for all your hard work. I've been to a couple of the meetings, and each one I'm increasingly impressed by the detail and complexity, and your willingness to listen to people make good suggestions. So thank you very much for coming out on a rainy night. My question is, and I may have missed it in here, what's all this going to cost? What, in other words, are there cost projections in order to do some of these things? You know, and Dick raises the question about whether or not the population projections are actually viable. And I know you're looking at a spread on that. But have you been able to say, if we did what needed to be done or in stages, what are the costs on this? Because, you know, this is tax dollars voted on by the council, all these kinds of projects and everything. Have you worked anything out like that?
When we're getting, I suggest we take a little break and we'll get to that, but we are looking at, so the water use development plan sort of is the same level as the Maui Island plan. It's not CIP level, project-based cost for an individual well development, but it does have costs where those can be quantified for a specific strategy, and we're talking about that in detail when we're getting to the resource options.
Thank you.
Many of those are not quantifiable because we know what there's the potential for offsetting demand with different conservation measures, but they don't really have a dollar figure to them. So what we're doing is we're trying to use, for comparative purposes, predicted 20-year life cycle cost for the conventional resources in terms of developing, expanding a water treatment plant or looking at a well field in a specific area. So we'll get to that.
So that would point us at least in the direction of where a cost estimate might emerge from, based on what you just said and the unknowables, but you can still at least kind of move in a direction of where something may be going.
So one of the purposes of this plan is, of course, to guide CIP planning. This is a 20-year projection, so it's really probably not productive to assign specific costs. That's going to change so much over that time frame, but it can guide the counties and the private purveyors CIP planning. There should be a 1 to 6 year time frame, and guide the council in their land use decisions of this is what the community would like to see. We, an example, want agricultural uses to be met by alternative resources and not tap into additional surface water. So this is just trying to compare the different resource options on a 20-year basis.
All right, well, thank you.
And again, the demand projections, we don't take them at face value, but because we required by county charter to comply with the Maui Island plan, and those were the projections that were adopted, we're using that. There's different options, and we have to consider land use designation to some extent, but that is the basis for the projected demand over 20 years.
And with the HCNS changeover and the other kinds of things, is this having a significant impact on your ability to, what Lucy Ann was talking about, will the plantations be able to, these fragments be able to manage these water resources? It's kind of like the Cold War. It was easier when there was one superpower. Okay, we knew this. Now it seems like we're fragmenting somewhat. Is that impacting your planning process?
It's changing as we speak. So, we have 2 contested cases ongoing. So available surface water and who's going to manage those systems, we don't know. So we're therefore laying out some plausible or probable scenarios with the best available data we have to date. We don't see the purpose of putting the whole plan on hold until these contested cases have played out. So it's this is the range, what we're dealing with. And even more important, this is what the community wants to see that can guide the commission in their assessment of upstream uses and desirable uses for primarily surface water. So we think it has, they're still compatible.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a quick 5-minute break, some snacks, and then.
Would you be mean, please?
You don't want to see that.
I've seen you mean, it's not that bad.
Okay, let's get going again here. We don't want to keep you all night. I guess we have to be out of here by 9 anyway. So phase 2 here tonight, we really want your input now. We can go back as much as we need and refer to the material, the summary. There's a few values and principles and objectives, not a few, there's many of them that's been identified over this now almost decade-long public process, because we go back looking at the advisory committees and the public that were here in 2004 and after that looking at the first version of the department's water use and development plan. So now if you look at your agenda from page 2 on, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but we like your feedback if there's something here that stands out. These principles are, of course, island-wide and not specific to the region, but trying to synthesize input from the community, not just the general values. I'll just read them really briefly here. That would be the values and beliefs that have been expressed by the community, also been derived from the general plan and other policy documents. So we're thinking these are guiding the preparation of the plan in the process and the content, and can also be sort of consultant. Keep this in mind as we're looking at the different specific resource strategies. The first one is respect the public trust doctrine, the state water code as a foundation for water planning. The Native Hawaiian Ahupua'a system and cultural traditions can provide guidance on water stewardship. Water kuleana of all Mauians creates responsibilities as well as rights. Be transparent and inclusive of all Mauians in all aspects of water planning and management. Recognize the complexity and interconnectedness of the hydrologic cycle, groundwater and surface water systems. Use the precautionary principle in water planning, recognizing this era of climate unpredictability. Water resource management demands comprehensive and integrated policies and solutions. Consider both island-wide and regional effects and solutions to issues that are important. Water resource planning and solutions should support ecological, social, and financial sustainability. And last, create an actionable plan that provides water supplies for our diverse water uses. The options for solving water resource and supply issues will decrease and costs will increase with each year of delay. This is something that just mentioned earlier, that we know we have a lot of uncertainties moving forward with this plan, but we also don't see it as a benefit of putting it on hold, rather trying to tackle some of these difficult issues and conflicting issues that sort of been postponed, and trying to address them now, not anticipating that we're going to find solutions or compromises to all of them. Then continue on page 3 there, the planning objectives generally, and how we interpret or translate those into more specific strategies. I'm going to go through those too.
When you say continuing on page 3, what are you talking about?
Oh, I'm starting on page 3, not continuing, of the agenda material. Are you with me? planning objectives then, under the categories, I guess, of both maintaining sustainable resources, minimizing adverse environmental impacts, protect and restore streams. Oh, look, there's a duplication. Protect cultural resources and why do I have a double one? These strategies that sort of translate from those plan objectives would include applying ecosystem, a HOPAA-based precautionary approach based on science, local knowledge, collaboration, and community education, to consult with the Native Hawaiian community and the local representative.
Eva?
Yes.
In terms of the time available, I think we should be talking. You want some
Okay.
feedback? You want some feedback
Yes.
from us? You have feedback from us?
People think these principles are
I'm done.
wonderful. They're good principles.
Yeah.
They're good things.
Let me, Eva,
Yes.
first let me thank you very much for putting together a lot of material, the big 214-page introduction material, which we're not even looking at tonight, plus all these regional things. But I do have some major complaints, and I want to...
Okay, can't hold my more down.
And one is that this is not a plan that anybody can pick up and say, this is what we need to do. These are a bunch of ideas which would be useful to consult this, or to look at this, or evaluate this, or all these various things. In some cases, operational. But what a plan needs is costs. A plan needs somebody who's responsible for who is responsible. Is it the water department? Is it the private companies? Is it the community and general public? Who is responsible for doing these things? So you can call somebody accountable. Otherwise, you don't have a plan. You build a house, you need to know what the carpenter's going to do, what the plumber's going to do. And you need to know the costs. And those have to be now, in some cases, you may have 2 or 3 different ways of getting the same thing done, even more than 2 or 3 done. So there should be some attempt made to figure out what is the relative costs of those things so you can make decisions about the best way to accomplish something like saving water or whatever it might be. You also need a prioritization. You have here a shopping list of things that are good, but which ones come first, which one are the most important, which one will accomplish the most, which one will be least costly, etc. There also needs to be a relationship to the county budget and the water department's budget, annual appropriations. How much money will need to be raised, and it should be raised in property taxes, or should be raised by water rates, should be raised by water meter rates. None of that is in here, and so a plan which has lots and lots of wonderful information doesn't lead to anything being done about it. And the reason why I'm saying that is we have the same problem with the Maui Island plan. As you know, I was vice chair of the GPAC on that. We came up with a final document, and then we asked that numbers be put down for a budget and whatever. And for example, the water department gave us like 4 numbers: West Maui, South Maui, East Maui, and they put just grossing 100 million here, 50 million here, 20 million here, but never said where it would be spent: reservoirs, pumps. They didn't put any numbers down of maintaining the present system. It was only possibly these. So there was no realities to it, and so that's why nothing has been done. So my complaint is, and it's a strong one, is we need to put down something that somebody 2 years from now, after this plan is adopted, whoever adopts it, will say, now I know what to do.
Yeah, let me address those multiple things, and thank you. We do appreciate criticism too. No offense taken. The Maui Island plan does have implementing action which are agreeable. Not much of that has been implemented to date. This plan should not try to mimic having implementing actions with a time frame. It should, however, guide the 1 to 6 year CIP process, not just for the water department, because this plan is really by mandate now addressing all water users and users on the island. This is not the county water department's plan. So it should guide the commission in their decisions about resource allocations, reservations, and management for all water users, including the county. It should also guide the county council in their land use decision and project management, including CIP funding. This plan will not have the type of detail that sets forth a specific project with a time frame, but it will provide recommendations to council. These are some ways how these actions can be implemented, but it's not going to have project-specific CIP level cost. But we could go to the last section, which is, this is kind of where we're getting to the meat of the matter and where we want your input. Again, we're looking at 20-year strategies, identifying the cost of comparison over a 20-year life cycle, not trying to figure out if well A is going to cost $6 million and if the water department or Hawaii Water Company is going to pay for it. That detail is not going to be in here. So let's, unless there's some other objections. Oh, Pam's going to.
Yeah, actually, we're not to that point yet of giving that kind of detail. We do have some costs in here a little bit later on starting on page 33. But this is preliminary information. We want to make sure that we kind of understood the issues and that we have some general strategies outlined. From there, then we will delve into more detail about, you know, how they fit together, how they would be implemented, fleshed out. Obviously, this is just a laundry list at this point. So, you know, we don't want to go down a path and do a lot more work. What if we don't have the initial ideas right as far as what the strategy should be? And so we want to get input on, do you agree with the strategies? Do you have other ones? Did we miss it? Etc.
Just to follow up on what you said, it probably isn't a good idea to call it a plan if it's not a plan. It's a good report.
Yeah, it's not a plan yet.
Because that's what's confusing, is you're calling it a plan. We were asked to come here and review this plan and give input. But to me, it looks like resource information. It looks like potential strategies. It has very iffy and some inaccurate information on what's going to happen with agriculture on the island. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what confuses the public, I think, when you call something a plan and you ask them to come and review a plan and it's not really a plan.
Well, I think in our email that came from us directly, that it's clear as to what this is. I'm not sure what information.
Water use and development plan. That's what it says on the document.
Okay, well, yeah, you're receiving this today, but
That's what it said on the email.
wherever you get it from, you know, the email that we sent out specifically, or you get the information by going to our webpage, I think it's clear as to what the purpose of the meeting is and so on. But okay, I guess
No,
it's,
but the
we
document you're
get your.
giving us, it says it's a plan, and I agree with Dick, it's not a plan. It doesn't have prioritization strategies on there. It doesn't have the cost or any ideas of where the funding
Okay,
is.
point taken. So I guess that we should say that this is, the project is the preparation of the plan, and that would be clear. Thank you.
I'd like to speak to the same thing, and the reason I came out tonight is a frustration that I have with the county's planning and execution, and maybe not very good ability to do it. And the general plan, not having an implementation plan in place when it was adopted until 3 years later, and then, you know, there are a million things in it, and it's not well staffed, and it's not funded, and so I feel like we just tread water, we don't make progress. And I really don't want to see that happen with the water plans. I think it's really important, and I want to compliment you for all the work. I think you guys are experts. Every question that's been asked of you tonight, you pretty much have an answer for. I think you guys, you know, really understand it better than I will. Well, what I'd like to see in the end is I'd like you to envision scenarios for different parts of the island that you think are reasonable given what you know, whether it's climate change or population growth or, you know, all the various factors that you thought about. And then come out with an expected future and put a stake in the ground. And that, under the water code, would be your recommended plan. And that's one of the things that it says that this has to have. It's a recommended pathway. And then, you know, you might alter that scenario and have alternative outlooks and alternative plans to deal with these variations that come about. And then, of course, all the cost factors, you know, underneath that. And then, of course, after that, you'd expect to have the actual action plan. You know, once the county council adopts it and approves the funding, and then we want to see the timeline, who's going to do it, and the money that it's going to take to get there, and then regular reviews and goals and objectives. So even the conservation plan, and I know there was a presentation to the council, I read it on the internet today. It has a lot of things you could do, but it doesn't talk about when these things could be done and how many gallons could be saved and how that would impact, you know, the greater plan. So I can see a whole bunch of different tracks feeding into this scenario planning, some of which are global that affect, you know, we're going to do dual flush toilets, for instance, and we're gonna implement them by a building code. And when that's done, it's gonna do this. I probably said enough, but that's what I would, when you finish your work, I'd like you to work toward that kind of a concrete document. It's really workable for us, so that 5 years from now, when, you know, we have a new mayor, we have a new planning director, we have a new water director, you know, we can go back and say, okay, now where are you? What have you done? What haven't you done?
Well, yeah, let me address that, because we have pretty strong directives both from our boss and from the state water code and the state framework, and as well an adopted scope of this plan, what it is going to accomplish and what it's not going to accomplish. It is, again, not going to be a CIP plan that's going to outline exactly what you mentioned, the conservation measures that are under development by the county water department. Those are CIP level. We're looking at that 1 to 6 years, and they will change over 20 years. So in this process, we're outlining the recommended options and leaving the implementation on the CIP level. So it's still going to guide the CIP program for the department, but for other uses, the private purveyors as well. So that includes input we need from you. How aggressive should conservation be, not just to accomplish the municipal potable demand, but what about ag users? Efficient irrigation for ag use or private purveyors. There could be county-wide regulations that should apply to all uses and not just implemented in the municipal districts and for potable purposes. So just in terms of what the scope is that's already been framed and adopted by the State Water Commission, some kind of like a frequent asked questions synopsis of what the plan is on our website. And I'm sorry that it's somewhat misleading. You're thinking you're coming tonight and you're actually reviewing the draft plan. This plan is still in process, and we still need input from the community to really frame these resources before we have a final recommendation that eventually will go to the board and to the county council. So bear with us. We really like to get through some of these resource options and get your input on it before they're really becoming that final, not project specific, but a final resource option. Okay, I'm gonna.
Maybe I won't give the microphone back. So you did speak, sir, about, you know, having kind of a report card and being able to go back and be accountable and so on. So one thing that I know we're throwing a lot of different pieces at you, and apologize for that, but on page 5 of the materials, we kind of put together some criteria that, you know, might eventually become part of a report card. So, you know, at some point when you have a chance, maybe we'll do it at a future meeting, or, you know, give us a call or an email about what you think about some of these criteria as ways to measure progress and so on. So again, we're throwing a lot of different pieces at you, and go ahead.
So well, I guess it's not a plan yet. I see it more like a guiding principles. You know, something that people are going to get recommendations from to create a potential project in the future, if and when it was adopted. So we've been, I mean, the realistic thing is reality is we've been coming to these meetings since 2004, and we haven't seen the actual plan yet, and understanding there's many reasons behind that. The State Water Commission has tasked you folks to do this. It needs to be adopted. A lot of the initiatives, not initiatives, but recommendations or ideas or suggestions or strategies, they all have to be in collaboration with the Water Commission for any one of those things to become a reality. So, you know, earlier we were talking about advocacy. You know, something in here, you know, in terms of, I mean, the state is telling us to do this, but yet the county can't enforce, they can't initiate any one of these particular things. So what I'm trying to say is maybe we need to put in here for suggestions or strategies to better find ways of collaborating and supporting the Water Commission or the code, or, you know, the Water Commission asks us to do all these things in all the different counties, but then they don't have the staff, the resources to actually hold this plan together, to initiate and, you know, components of it. And so I don't know. It's
Appreciate the input, and I think you're accurate to some points, and there are definitely missing pieces, and there's different reasons for it, including finding the correct information to base suggestions on. So this is probably always going to be an improvement, and I feel that some of that is sort of outsourced to the counties, but hopefully what we do, if it's clear enough, it would help the commission sort of we're doing their job, but the benefit in the end is that they have better data than when they started. They know what the community's priorities are in terms of different resource uses. So, Lucian.
Well, I'm impressed by all of the, the principles that have been incorporated into this. I think you guys have really listened very well to a lot of the meetings I've been at anyway. I do share some confusion over when it becomes a plan. Maybe you could clarify. I'm looking at the code, and it says regional plans create, the county, each county shall create a regional plan for water developments, including recommended and alternative plans, costs, adequacy of plans, and relationship to the water resource protection and water quality plan. So will we end up with a plan where this long list of strategies is condensed into a much smaller sort of thing that kind of addresses a recommended and alternative plan in terms of, regional strategy? In other words, will it look at the Wailuku hydrological region and say, here's what we think the best strategy would be here, and look at the central, and here's what we've heard the best strategy would be here?
I don't think I have the final answer, because it really depends on where we're coming up after this final third round of public meetings. We're going to have to come back with a draft document. But between looking at the scope of the plan was already committed and adopted by the commission, you can also glance at the Hawaii county's water use development plan that was adopted to give you some idea of what a final regional plan looked like. I think we're taking it clearly a step further in terms of recommended strategies and policies, not just quantified by region, but that would include then based on hydrologic sectors. So this will probably be Wailuku combined with Central, because Maui is definitely interconnected both naturally and sort of artificially by transports between hydrologic sectors. So that would include all the uses and users in that region. So Wailuku Central region will include the agriculture, diversified ag, sort of what you see the uses and users are included in this synopsis, with a matrix that fleshes out more what those strategies are, based on community input. What are the 1, 2, and 3, so to say? What are the consequences of those? So I don't have
there'll be a section that someone can kind of look at.
It will be by
here's
section.
where we're heading.
Yeah, I guess we're calling them.
So if that is the case, then my input is, I think there's a couple of important things that the plan needs to do. One is, I mean, we're talking about the what, but I think we need to talk about the how. The what is, the different strategies for getting water. But the how is how we can work with the state water code. The state water code gives us very few tools, and I think we need a policy in here about the desirability of designating aquifer areas when they reach a certain portion of their sustainable capacity, so that there's some management tools available. Because otherwise, when you contact the water commissioner, they say, well, it's kind of nothing we can do. It's not designated, and what power does the county have? None. So I just think you need that strategy. It's a strategy, in other words, for
amendments to
management.
state water code to address alternative triggers for designation.
Yeah. And
What's the pattern been on the chlorides in the water level? Because
Let me just have
something
Lucian
behind
finish
that
here, and then we'll
last
get to
time.
you.
Yeah, sorry. So there's just a couple more things. The other thing is, I think we should have a vision for the management of the current ditch systems, the 3 major ditch systems we have, and work towards a long-term management of them, because we do know that they require investment, maintenance, so forth and so on. and we have companies that are like hanging on life support that are in charge of them. I mean, so I would think that any reasonable water plan would have some mention of this, once again, as a strategy. And then, I think one of the other important kind of overriding things is looking towards moving towards a one water system like Honolulu has, where wastewater and fresh water are managed as a water cycle, as an entity. And so you can have water replacement strategies, like how much potable water are we using in a place where we might replace it with reclaimed water. And you know, so we're actively working towards these things in our CIP, and they're part of our overall vision. Maybe we need to create special districts to actually fund things that couldn't come out of CIP. But if we don't think in a more visionary manner, we'll be having the same conversation 10 years from now, going, well, you know, there'd be some good ideas, but they cost too much. So just suggesting that we look at some of
Well,
these.
does it rain anymore? I mean, how much rain does the island get? What's the maximum that it gets?
Yeah, none of us knows. Thank you.
Okay,
Does it ever
let me
increase?
just move into, because there are some of these, that you're mentioning some of the resource strategies that we need your input on them. So if I may, I'd like to move to Appendix B, what is the preliminary strategies for Central Wailuku sector on page 33, where, and we can go back to questions, but so if we basically agree on the principles, the values, and the broad planning objectives, some of these translate into these specific strategies that deal with potable and non-potable supply, resource augmentation. These are not proposed in any particular order, or they're good or bad, but we want input in order to frame them and really flesh them out. So with the objective then that the following strategies are considered to meet the 20-year projected demand of an additional 14 MGD within a range of 10 to 17. That includes DWS systems and private systems, and a potential 12 to 14 MGD of non-potable demand for agriculture irrigation outside HCNS plantation. Just kept leaving that piece out for now.
And you're saying potential additional besides what's already being used
Additional.
For ag? Okay.
Additional. Of course, there's a range of many different options. We try to include those that have some that can be viable, can be feasible. They've either been proposed throughout this decade-long process, they've been looked at internally by the Department of Water Supply or another purveyor, or they've been brought up in this last round of meetings. So you have the first ones here, we don't have to go through all of them, but the first one addressed potable supply. The column number 2, if applicable, it will give you some idea of what the potential amount or volume supply it would provide, and if there is an applicable estimated cost. Again, that's a 20-year life cycle cost that would include the capital cost, operation and maintenance per 1,000 gallons of produced water, and now we're talking about potable. Gives you a little brief summary on opportunities and constraints in terms of assessing that strategy. And the last one, implementation risk, in terms of how viable is this strategy. Is it high risk? Then there may be legal or hydrologic constraints that make it less practical to implement. So again, this is not final. We really need to gauge input specifically for the region on some of these. So potable supply then, ordinary conventional resources, that's developing groundwater or surface water. Some of the options that we looked at by the Department of Water Supply was northward basal groundwater development that was going into the North Waihe aquifer and even Kahukaloa. There was used just studies with modeled pump scenarios done in order to have a better scientific understanding of what is the viability and option to have good yield and minimal impact on the aquifer if we would do that. Turned out that hydrologically it wasn't as promising as thought. Don't have to go into the details, but this is why you don't have any really number. This option wasn't pursued further in-house. That doesn't mean that it cannot be looked at again. The second one was eastward basal groundwater development that's been looked at going back a decade and more. Developing wells on 1,000-foot elevation in Haiku aquifer. Originally the Honopo aquifer were looked at too and was taken out as not being viable. Potentially that could supply 12 to 14 million gallons a day at a really, you have a range here that kind of looks a little shocking from $3.71 to $9.67. And I want to just include because we had so many different, we had such a variation in assessed costs for that. So just disclosure that we really have not a good hard figure what that alternative would cost.
Could I interrupt for a second?
Yes.
Well, you have like the cost, this is the cost per 1,000 gallons. You're selling the water back to the customers right now for sometimes $2, $3, $4, $5. So actually, some of these cost figures here are higher than the revenues you're getting.
Second.
So what I think is needed in a plan is some suggestion at least that you're going to raise rates.
That's a good strategy.
Well, we've heard this every.
Yeah, I mean, so in other words, you have, yeah, no, and I'm not saying for or against, but you know, to talk about these numbers as the cost of water, $5, $6, $9. Obviously, at present rates, those are totally unfeasible. So somehow, some relationship between revenues and expenses is absolutely essential. And also, this list that you have, long list here, should also probably be at least your recommendations on prioritization initially.
So we're moving towards that, but we don't really want to put that out there without really gauging your general. So this is not saying, you know, just going with a cheaper version.
Right now, you're the experts looking at all these things, and I think it would be very helpful to say, this is our first draft. We want to see where we made mistakes. Rather than just giving a long list here, we don't really have the ability to respond right back, prioritization, which one you have, and for example, something with low risk and low cost should be a higher priority than something, let's say, that's high cost and high risk.
So based on this input, what we want to do is to produce that. But like Pam said, we really not, our strategy is really to gauge acceptability of different policies and uses for different resources rather than ranking alternatives by cost or viability. We realize that that's needed, but we're not doing that here. That is not the purpose today. John.
Sorry. So what you're asking people now is to look at this list and give you want their sense of, oh, we like these alternatives better, but these alternatives less. Is that what you're asking?
In terms of acceptability, because these may be pretty straightforward when you look at conventional resources, but some of these are more policy-oriented.
So I think there's a little bit, I think you're asking a hard question for people. It's just me. I could be totally wrong, and somebody can tell me to shut up. But I think you're asking a hard question for people to answer because there's a gap between what you say your values and goals are, which you got right and you heard in the front, and what's listed here. So there's this strong voice in the beginning of your draft plan about protecting public trust interests. But there's no weighing in these options of here's the impact on the four protected public trust uses of water and these alternatives. So people are lacking that information even though everybody said that's really important to us. They've also said, I think I've heard consistently at all the meetings, including the first round of meetings, people really value conservation. But you're not presenting conservation measures as alternatives to new source development.
So we should probably just, because these are, again, the first ones here are the conventional resources that are sort of the...
Yeah, there's strategies for conservation, but not on this list, right?
Well, yeah, there is.
No, there
so
are.
we're coming to that.
Go to
You know,
next
what we'll do,
page.
I think,
There's three sides to it.
I think what we'll do, we'll focus on those because truly those are the ones we really need input on because those are more policy oriented rather than conventional. There's conventional resources tend to be straightforward. There's cost and there's different impacts, but some of these policy suggestions really steer what conventional resources will be looked at. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna skip we're short on time too. I don't want to hold you, so I'm gonna move over to.
Well, Jonathan, there's 3 pages, so the conservation ones are on the next, when you flip
Page
over.
35.
Page 35.
And I'll pick the ones so that we need input on. Just have to find it first.
I don't think we can really go
And you
through.
don't have to have a plan to get the legislature to pass conservation measures either.
So here's, it's actually on the first page. This is the policy towards the bottom. Using surface water with the knowing that we're potentially facing drought conditions long-term, provided that in-stream flow standards, Koyana, a pertinent traditional customer needs are met. We also know surface water tends to be less expensive than groundwater in terms of meeting demand.
Where are you reading?
I'm on 4 rows from the bottom on page 33. So surface water being less expensive than groundwater development. Some of the ideas that sort of has been combined is, yes, there is support for surface water use for certain uses, specifically public trust uses. That would include municipal supply, but it would not include agriculture, for example. So a compromise is to balance surface water use seasonally, meaning that in the wet season, in the winter months, more users can rely on surface water than in the dry season when the stream needs water the most, the taro cultivation need the water the most. You avoid surface water use and go to other alternative, whether that is groundwater, heavy conservation, whatever that is. The seasonal use approach is not really something that's being done now. It's almost the opposite. There's a lot of conflicting demand for surface water in the dry season.
Are you talking about kalo cultivation?
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about kalo cultivation, taro?
No, I'm saying off-stream uses. So assuming that
Oh.
in-stream flow standards are set, you have provided that Koyana pertinent traditional customer uses are met,
Yeah.
which is set through the in-stream flow standard process.
Yeah.
So off-stream uses, whether those are public, or I'm asking you, is it okay, should surface water be used for as much as possible, including agriculture, knowing that this is the cheapest source? Are there reasons for not doing that? We'd like just your input on that.
The cheapest source, I mean, you know, that's one of the problems that we brought up earlier, is that if there's not enough information to compare, I mean, this is a long list, so if we go to the top of one page and go to the bottom of the third page, you know, how are you going to compare these different options in this kind of a format? And part of what we need, part of the information that we need to make a decision, if we're going to give you input, is what is the timeline? If something looks like it's cheaper and easier, but it takes 10 years, then maybe that's not a more desirable option than something that's a little more expensive.
So we're just trying to gauge this from a policy perspective in order to really frame that as an option. I mean, it's really just what is acceptable uses for surface water, and this is something that's been brought up a lot to us, and we're just trying to define that, not just in terms of what is most affordable or not, but what is an acceptable end use for stream flow when it is available, when there's success available. For ag, John. It's getting late.
Yeah, the next item down, you're talking about raw water storage. I've been talking about for 15 years for raw water
Yes, you have.
storage at Wiley Reservoir, and now especially if ACNS is going bye-bye. You know, I know time there are figures on that. Carl Friedman done figures on that 10 years ago, exactly what it cost. I think I wanted 1 billion gallon. I think we come up with 300 million gallon reservoir and figures on it at that time. And my point at that is take stormwater runoff. Even today, there's more water than is needed in the river, and that's some that can be stored. Of course, 2 months ago, we had a lot of water, but couldn't handle all that. But, as you were just saying, that things taken care of, and the one above that, IFS and all that, that there is stormwater runoff that could be stored, and that's not a big problem as I see it.
Raw water storage for stormwater runoff.
Raw water
capture.
storage runoff,
Yep.
yeah, storm runoff.
There,
Oh, sorry.
well,
I
there
don't
is
know who was
a
first.
study,
Yep.
I'm sure you guys are aware of it, that Bureau of Reclamation did 2008 final report.
Yes.
Stormwater reclamation. So 4 of the scenarios were in Maui, and they gave, you know, costs. I mean, of course, these costs are now 8 years old, but there was some analysis done with the thought that this is a useful resource. Back to the one water concept, stormwater would be part of useful water, and you know, reclaimed water would be part of useful water, and stream water would be part of useful water, and well water would be part of useful water. I just want to comment about the haiku eastward basal strategy there. It should say that there's no capstone in haiku either, and the head levels are kind of undetermined. I don't think there's a well drilled in that aquifer that has a head level above like 8 or 9 feet, and most of them around 4 or 5. So I'm not sure how much of a supply would be built up to support this kind of extraction of, you know.
So that's the USGS study needed to assess high-level groundwater, define hydrologic conditions, and ground and surface water interaction.
Yeah, and probably even more than that. I mean, it appears someone can drill a well in one part of the aquifer and have a relatively high level, and then another part of the aquifer, they have like a 3-foot head level and all the wells around. So it
would require a really low elevation with a high monitoring wells in fact to do that. So
most of our wells are in the older geological formation. This is very young. I mean, Haleakala isn't 1 million years old yet. So you have very, very different patterns.
So again, I mean, this is more like not putting cost aside. Just from a policy standpoint, the water department is trying to move forward, getting more scientific information to explore groundwater as either alternative backup or as a primary source. So we want, that is great input. I mean, this is something that we should pursue. Hydrologic studies, putting in monitoring wells in order to get a better scientific understanding, knowing that the commission has limited time and resources. They have studied certain aquifers real well, such as the EAO.
Well, there is a monitoring well in Haiku Aquifer, and it's never been properly used.
Yeah, true. Yes?
One quick question, thanks. How are we defining and scaling implementation risk? I mean, is this risk to human life? Is this risk of permanent damage to the land?
No, just in terms of implementation risk to how, maybe risk is not the right word, really how viable if there are multiple constraints, whether those are legal, such as the East Maui consent decree may be an impediment looking at haiku aquifers specifically, or hydrologic constraints, practical constraints, there's just community resistance to going into Kahokoloa aquifer. So those combined, some of them are based on consultants that have assessed in a little more refined. We're not trying to make this into a science of anything, but just to give an idea of, is this difficult to implement?
Sure. And at any given point for each of these options is a column for environmental risk going to be looked at with consultants?
That would be really opportunities and constraints. For example, desal has some potential for environmental impact or for brine disposal, so that would be part of the risk assessment.
Okay.
So yeah, don't take that too literally. Okay, I wanted to move up to conservations.
Thank you. I wanted to support the comment with Lucianne about one water concept. I think you're moving toward it already because you have to look at the entire water system, not just the department of water supply. You got to look at everything. So I think that we're moving towards that logic, which is look at everything as one water system. So I'd like to be supportive of that concept. And then the other thing, which I can understand, which I do understand, it is inevitable that water rates are going to have to go up. All right, but I don't have to vote for it, and I don't have to stand for election having done that. So if I'm going to support any additional funding for the water department, and I'm going to be basing this on facts, I've got to base it on facts. I can't go to people and just say, well, we have to increase it because we need to do these things. It would seem that it might be useful to indicate what happens if an option is not chosen, so that a case can be made to the taxpayers, because right now I don't hear that conversation. People have to pay for this. They don't have enough money to live on now, and we're going to come to them and say we're going to increase your water costs, and we're not going to have a clear picture of what happens if we don't do it. Okay? And so I think that might be something that would be useful, because plans are put together by staff, but the policies are implemented by you know, the elected officials, the policy people. And I don't see a way to go to the public and say, I need more of your money, and here's the reason why, and if we don't do it, here's what will happen. So I really
Yeah.
see that. I'd
So,
certainly make
yeah,
that as a suggestion.
I go back to this, it's not, I know this plan is not going to be everything to everyone, but it is not going to include CIP level funding source or specific needed water rate increases. This plan will guide the community values and priorities in terms and guiding the CIP process. When that's coming up in county council or with private purveyors raising their in-builder rates, this is the guidance to pursue groundwater, because these are the reasonings. We would like to know why should we pursue groundwater instead of surface water, or why should we maximize alternative resources?
I'm not
and then
disagreeing with
that information should guide
And I understand why you
on
want
the
to stay
CIP
away
level.
from it because it's a hot potato. I understand perfectly.
No,
why
no,
you
no,
want to
that's
stay
not
away.
what I'm saying. It's just
But what I
the
want to,
projection is too long.
well, what I'd like to say is, and I understand it's very reasonable to stay away from that, but it is a reality that will stare people in the face, increased costs. That's why, even though you may not, I'm not saying put in a CIP when it gets to council, you're listing a number of options, you know, opportunities, constraints, what have you. But what happens if we don't do something? Okay, here are some things to do, but what happens if we do not do it? So that tells me later on, when it gets down to that level that you're talking about, I and other people would have something to say, well, okay, that's justifiable because we got to do this. Right now, and I know this is not your group really on, but I'm not sure we'll ever get to the point where someone can stand up and say, I support a water rate increase because of X, Y, and Z, and if we don't do it, A, B, C is going to occur. And I think we got to get down to the simple, just to keep you grounded. It's going to come out on the ground, and everything you're saying is very reasonable. But I'm going to want to know why you increase my water rate, and what am I going to get for doing it, and what happens if we don't do it? Those are three questions people ask, and they're not here. And they may not be here. This may not be the doctrine, but it's where you're going to lead people to.
Yeah, I think that the plan could include, for each strategy, you know, how much water would be saved or wouldn't be saved, what would be the consequence of not doing the strategy. So it doesn't have to be very specific about how much, you know, specifics, but it could talk about, well, you know, you're going to be more subject to litigation, or you're not going to save X amount of water, and that may cause you to exceed sustainable yield or whatever. So I think we could have some information of a general sort at this level, and then when something comes up, then obviously there could be information that goes to the council as to, okay, if you don't adopt a CIP, then obviously, you know, that would be more specific, but we could have general consequences in the plan. So,
It's just a thought.
no, good one, thanks.
Sure.
I really appreciate the comments that you made. And one of the things I wanted to say about, I don't think we're going to be able to get through this whole list today, but the thing that's hard to go through, without the scientific background of each one of these, it's hard for the general public to compare and to say, you know, I like this one better than that one. It's so tedious to go through this, and that's why we need the experts to make recommendations and then put the reasons for the recommendations in there with the costs, with the time frame, and with what Tom said, here's what will happen if we don't do something. We have some costs in here, so some of it's justification. Some of them, like Dick said, are higher than what we charge people for water right now. So if that was the desired way to go, based on, if you took the great list that you made of the values and the principles, and you said based on what we hear from the public, these are everybody here likes the values and principles. These are our recommendations because we know this about surface water, we know this about rainwater storage, we know this about stormwater storage. I'm looking at this, you know, we were talking about storage, and there is a cost for that. And it appears to be higher than, I guess this figure of $5.15 per 1,000 gallons is higher than what we're charging right now. So if that means that that's what it's going to cost the public going forward, then there is going to be an increase. But it's really difficult to ask lay people who aren't experts like you guys. And this is, to me, it's a report, it's a great report,
no way for us to compare one against the other.
Right. No, yeah, I hear you. I appreciate both your comments too, and want to clarify that we're not trying to take that, but we realize this is incredibly technical and it is really complex. It's science and it's legal. I'm not claiming that I am an expert on the topic, although I've been doing it for a long time. And we're not trying to get the public to comment and understand every piece of this. We're really trying to just highlight the important information in order to gauge more the policy, the acceptance of different resource strategies without looking blind at what cost is. And I promise the next step will be then our recommendations. We just didn't feel that we're not ready, we don't have that. We haven't had the discussion on the reasons for not touching groundwater or the reasons for maximizing recycled when you take cost out of the equation. So you will see that, and there will be this big humongous draft plan that I don't expect the general public to go through, but we are going to have to go through that with the board and the council section by section in order to understand the final recommendation. So again, I apologize, it's a lot of information. Don't expect you all to digest it and understand it all. I want to throw out one more thing here before we wrap it up so you can get home on time to your families. In terms of conservation, we try to gauge acceptance of, as you know, the water department and some of the private purveyors do have active conservation programs. Most of what's being done is funded through water rates. The Department of Water Supply is rate funded. There's no tax money that goes towards the municipal system. The other option is to have a regulatory approach that can be countywide that applies to all water users and users, including private purveyors. That's when you, through county code, for example, you can require certain behaviors that's not planting thirsty plants in dry regions or telling people what time of the day they can water. There's many pros and cons of doing that. We have laid out some of it, but any comments on why that would be a desirable approach to go? We know that there's a lot to take, so to say, or to gain from addressing outdoor demand, and there's a lot of, I wouldn't say waste, but not essential water use, especially in dry regions. So any thoughts and comments on supporting or not supporting regulatory conservation methods?
I think it's contextual to the bigger picture. If we were in Las Vegas, for instance, passing a regulation that would say you had to tear out your lawn would be a reasonable thing. But without access to the bigger picture of how desperate the water situation is, and I think the conservation needs to be matched up with that vision. So,
okay. So yeah, I just want to interpret that. So that is not, it's in relation to what resource you have, not that it's just a certain behavior that's acceptable in terms of water use. Keeping in mind, it's a public trust. We're talking about potable water. So even if we have endless water resources in Maui at a reasonable price, should regulatory uses, how people behave and how you use, is that still desirable or not? You're saying it's in relation to the...
Off in that instance, you're not as aggressive. And that's the way I would look at it.
Yeah.
The more desperate the water situation is, the more aggressive your measures have to be.
Okay,
Now, that's assuming that you have appropriate in-stream flow and you have all these other things, and when you describe the situation where water usage is not a concern, then...
Okay, great, thank you. Luciana?
My understanding is 40% of the water we're pumping from the Iao and Waihe'e aquifers, good, clean, highest quality water, is being used for landscaping in South Maui.
Beautiful plants.
So what do you think?
South Maui.
We'd like to hear.
It just seems like what I've seen in LA is they pay people to take their lawns out and put in, succulents or rock gardens or whatever. To me, that's a low-hanging fruit. I mean, you can issue more water meters
You
because...
don't actually pay people to do that. I mean, in Santa Barbara, they're just fining you if you have a
well,
lawn.
in LA, they actually buy out their lawn, and a lot of people have done it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Vegas
very
too.
common to walk through neighborhoods and see all the xeriscaping. So I would just say, when we've tried to introduce a regulatory sort of thing, the resorts fought back, they didn't like it. When we tried to introduce watering times of day, there was pushback from Wailea Homeowners Association. But offering incentives to people, you know. doesn't seem
Incentives
like it
not
hurt.
regulatory, you're saying?
Well, I'm all for the regulatory because I don't live in South Maui.
Oh.
But I think people who live there would have to
I
address
think it's
that.
fair to
first.
say in Wailea, you should not water in the rain, which is a standard practice, and then
Consensus,
then it runs
Yeah.
down the street.
Yeah.
Standard practice.
Yeah. But see, then it takes the water police. We don't have water police, and I think no one wants to get into water police. So, you know, unless the association would regulate that themselves.
Yeah, I think John had one first, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
Being of the senior citizen class, a lot of us don't like the government telling us everything to do, whether it's water or anything else, so it's gotta be a compromise, but, I get sick of it after a while, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that, regulation here and there, which after a while.
Incentives rather than,
Yeah, the younger people don't mind, the older people don't like it.
got it. Okay, one last here, and then we'll
I think this is something I wish you would keep in mind as you finalize and make your first real draft, final draft. Think about who is going to be using this plan to make decisions.
county council and commission.
The county council, the commission, the water department will make certain decisions about things, et cetera. And there'll be one other group out there, and that is the community plans. Over the next 3 years, even though the mayor has put a temporary moratorium on it, my understanding is that those plans will be going ahead. And if those community planners sit in West Maui, they're pretty much with the aquifer. But here in Central Maui, South Maui, upcountry, et cetera, they cross over districts. I would hope that the final water use and development plan, even though it's required by the State Water Commission, be done by aquifers, that you do have in there some information that will help the people upcountry, when they put together their upcountry plan or the Haiku Paia plan together, that they will have some score sheet on the amount of water that's in their district, where it's coming from, and some of the solutions that you would recommend that they look at when they put together those community plans. They will not be the experts. They'll be citizens. The council will then file it. But this will be your chance to put the water component into the 6 community plans on this island. And I would urge you to figure out, I'm not sure how you'll do it right now, because you don't have that database right now set up. But somehow or other, it would be really great for the upcountry district that's going to be taking a look at it, to make a recommendation that this is what we should do or should not do. And a lot in the end will be, the second area, besides the community plans, is costs. I would like to be able to give to the county council the information it needs to say what should the water rates be, what should the water meter charge be, to develop the resources that are needed, to develop the conservation programs that are needed, and whatever. And right now, as I mentioned, you know, we're charging $2, $3 for water. Agricultural users pay $1. And if you're producing water at $5 or $6 a thousand and charging $1, who's going to absorb that cost? And I'm not saying we should go against agriculture. What I am saying, though, we should have a realistic picture of where the costs are and where the revenues are. And this plan does none of that now. It talks only about the cost of developing certain amounts of water, but it will depend. In some areas where you have lots of agriculture, you know, and especially if now HCNS got its water practically free from East Maui. Now they're going to have diversified ag there. Those rates are going to go up. Perhaps the county will be supplying that water through the EMI system. How much are they going to charge for agriculture water?
There will be some discussion about rate options, but again, it's not going to be on the CIP level because water rates again is set by an annual budget by the council.
But they
so
should
even
be,
though
they will want that
in
information.
terms of consequences, but what we're trying to represent is the true cost of developing water, and in that context, how does conservation options look and how does alternative resources? And what we really need to find out is the reasoning beyond cost for using one versus another. Those are important. The reasons for doing one thing and not the other, that's not just based on the cost. So I'm going to end this here. I know you want to go home.
I'm curious, how many people here would support having a wellhead protection ordinance before we drill new wells?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I think that's... Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Young.
Yeah, well,
That was a no-brainer.
I just think that's a question, you know, before we invest in these new wells, we should have some sort of criteria for citing them.
Great, thank you. Tomorrow night, we're gonna be, upcountry, 6 o'clock at the Pukalani, wait, where are we tomorrow, Pukalani?
Kukulani,
Yeah.